Right. Hello, everyone. Hope everyone's having a great Wednesday so far. My name is Scott Yell. I'm one of our customer success managers here at Blackbaud. Thanks so much for joining our session today on Power Automate 101. Do love the good vibes that I'm seeing in the chat so far today. Certainly, let's keep that energy going throughout the session today. Love to see it. Well, thanks again for joining today, everyone. I'm going to pass things off to our key presenter today, Glenn Hudson. But before I do that, I want to just go over a quick few housekeeping items before we get started. I do see that most of you are familiar with the chat, so great on you there. You'll also notice there's the Q&A tab on the right-hand side. Certainly, if any questions come up throughout the session today, go ahead and throw those in the Q&A section, so that way Glenn and I can see those and we can track them a little bit better in that section. As I said, looks like everyone's pretty familiar with the chat, so good on that side. The audio for this webinar is being broadcast through your computer speakers or headphones. So if you do run into any issues, typically just refresh your browser or X out, log back in. Usually does the trick. Keep in mind, too, that if for some reason you have to bounce or you miss some of the presentation today, the recording will be available afterwards. And then you can download the slides as well after the presentation. They will be associated with this webinar recording. And as I mentioned, Q&A, throw your questions in there, and the chat and messages can be used as well. But want to save all the time that we have for Glenn to do his thing today. So with that, I will pass it off over to Glenn.
Thank you, Scott. To share my screen as we get started. Hopefully you're seeing the Power Automate Custom Connectors 101. I'll go on and start off with something. I'm the type that the moment I zip up my suitcase, I remember something else that I need to put in. So for that reason, I was putting the final finishing touches on my presentation about 20 minutes ago. So I will send a link to the slides after toward the end of the presentation today, and then I'll have the admins upload that to the session, so that those that come and look at this afterwards for that. So I wanted to make sure I got the latest and greatest. I was waiting for some last minute stuff to come in to be able to share with you today. So again, there's no docs tab there, but you will get the documentation afterwards today. A lot of this is going to be show and tell as well, so there's not going to be as much, but there's still going to be some good stuff there as well. Again, some of the key things to say as far as the agenda today, we're going to be reviewing the concept of connectors, review the structure of APIs, creating a custom connector from scratch, tools for working with APIs and creating connectors, and concept to the introduction of what's called API keys and OAuth. Again, my name is Glenn Hudson. I'm a principal solutions architect here at Blackbaud. Started in Blackbaud in 2007. I stopped counting. I think it's 18-something years. I've been working with Sky API, Sky add-ins, Power Platform since about 2019. Safe harbor statement. I put this in. All I'm saying is that there may be a case in which I may mention something that is coming in the future of Blackbaud or Razor's Edge or what have you. I will make sure to highlight that should that come up in our conversation. Sometimes it comes up as a course of questions or whatnot. So again, as you might have seen already, make any decisions based on what's available now, because things may change. But again, I will make sure that if something is not live and not available today, that it is something I'm thinking about in the future, then I will make sure that is highlighted. This presentation is also going to have some third-party reference and links. There are several references to third-party examples and tools. These are for illustrative purposes only. Blackbaud is not responsible for or can assist in troubleshooting or assisting with the use of the services and the tools. And some examples are going to be shown purely for the functions and features they represent. So again, part of this is going to be just, let's make sure that we get some of the basics here. The session description kind of reiterate here. The long story short is are you already working with Power Automate and wish there was a connector for something that there's not a connector for right now? So this session is going to talk about how to begin and share some useful tips and tricks. With that being said, this session is truly geared as a 101, getting started discussion, focusing on the beginning of the concepts and methodology. For those that may have in-depth Sky API questions, a good resource is our community. For in-depth Power Platform questions, there is a dedicated community as well for that. Second, active only to Razor's Edge NXT itself, as well as we've got user groups and regional workshops. And there's also an Ask a Low-Code Developer. Those of you who are seeing this on Wednesday or live, it's tomorrow morning or Thursday morning at 10:30 Eastern Time. So again, our focus today is for those that are brand new to these concepts. So if for some reason we don't get to a question that may be more advanced, we're not intentionally ignoring you, but we're making sure that we can answer those questions that are specifically for those that are starting from this brand new. So because of the fact you may have already seen my head darting back and forth because I've got stuff on multiple screens, I'm going to go off camera for now so I don't see my own head bouncing back and forth. We'd like to start off talking about what is a connector. Again, I want to start from the beginning to make sure that we, for those that are getting to this for the first time, gets all these concepts. A connector wraps around an existing API and it hides the nitty-gritty and it facilitates the data flow in and out of the Power Platform. For this discussion specifically, it's Power Automate. Sometimes I get questions about Power Automate or what have you. Start making references to the API. They're like, no, I'm not asking about the API. I'm asking about Power Automate. Well, they go hand in hand. So in order for a connector to do something in Power Automate, for you to be able to do those actions you're maybe familiar with within Power Automate, there's 99 times out of 100, there's always a one-off for whatever reason. There's an API behind the scenes. So that's the key thing, is that APIs, connectors go hand in hand. But the thing about a connector is that for the end users that are working with Power Automate, it helps hide that nitty-gritty of the API. Actions. So we've got these different connectors within Power Automate. Each of those connectors have the individual actions that a connector provides. Typically, these are based on the specifics of the underlying API. So recently released the Blackbaud Razor's Edge NXT reports that has the get report status, list report jobs, list report instances, starter report execution job. All those are actually tied to endpoints within the API. Again, we're not going to be necessarily touching the API directly when we're in the connector mode, but this is mapping toward that. This is good to keep in mind when you're actually thinking about, hey, I want to create my own connector. Is the API there to do what I want it to do? Lots and lots of connectors. There are currently over 1,650 connectors within the Power Platform. I feel like that person with the cane. I remember when there was 400 connectors and we were celebrating as far as that goes. Blackbaud ranks only behind Microsoft as the organization with the most connectors published. Can't find what you need? There are a number of connectors and it's grown significantly over the past few years, but you may not find a connector you're looking for. That's the purpose of the discussion. You're not out of luck. In this session, we'll go over the basic concepts of custom connectors and how you can use those to help augment your Power Platform flows. Behind the scenes is REST API. This is still REST API behind the scenes. If you're not familiar with what API is, shameless plug, I did a What is API yesterday session about the same time yesterday. So if it's not available for on demand yet, it will be, but it goes through the very basics as far as what is an API. What do I mean by REST API? So the REST API is behind the scenes. And so in order to understand how to create a custom connector, you still have to know a little bit about it, about API. So if you weren't in the session yesterday, we'll go some high level information today. Yes, Ed. So with the reports connector, we could feasibly create a schedule via Power Automate to send to folks who don't have access to Razor's Edge NXT. Absolutely. And in fact, we may actually already have some examples in our showcase, but if not, that you're thinking on the right track. Who's this Jason, and that I'm talking about? Those of you who saw my presentation yesterday, sorry for the same examples, and don't cheat and give people the answer to my next question. But this session assumes you've already been working with the Power Automate a little bit, have introduced the concept of JSON or JSON, potato. This uses a key value pairing to describe data. So we'll see this in several places in working with connectors. So I've got a single JSON object on the left. So really what it is that, hey, I'm asking for information about a particular car. It's giving me the make DeLorean, model DMC-12, and the year is 1981. May seem a little cryptic at first. When we start looking through it, it'll start making sense. So I'm describing a specific car in this. The car is the DeLorean from Back to the Future. Now, just like you go through and do lists within Razor's Edge or Financial Edge, I know I'm making a lot of reference to Razor's Edge through this, but all this applies to our other Scott API-enabled conversations. You may actually get a list of things, whether it be from an ad hoc query and Serum Altru or a query or a list or what have you. Sometimes you may actually get a list of responses that says, hey, show me a list of all these cars. So again, I've got an example of a list. The difference here is I got these brackets at the beginning and the end. That's not showing also the DeLorean, but also a Cadillac Miller Meteor Sentinel 1959, which is Ecto 1. Yep, Elizabeth caught it from Ghostbusters. So again, if you've not really worked with this much, maybe for me, I looked at it for the first time and I was like, I'm not a coder. I don't understand all this stuff. But I kind of basically crossed my eyes and tilted my head and I was like, oh, it's starting to make a little sense. There are various ways to break down the structure of an API request. Whenever you look, when I was actually looking at different explanations to kind of make sure I was thinking things in the right direction, I saw things described like 4 or 5 different ways. So this is more conceptual, just to make sure that we're on the same page as far as certain things. There are certain parts of it. When I'm asking the API for something, there's a method, the type of request, the host, the server that has that API, the path, the part of the address that's asking for a specific endpoint, the parameter, the zeros in it which are looking for or filters in a search, and the body, which is basically when you're sending data over, not asking for data. So one of the things I mentioned at the top here is what's called method. There are different types of methods that we'll be talking about today. Well, the most one we'll be talking about get. So if I'm asking the API for something, is to get and retrieve data. A post is when I want to send data something. So when I'm submitting a form to a website, that's a post. A patch is updating information that's already there. And delete, poof, gone. So when we're taking a look at the API behind the scenes for Sky APIs, when we're looking at, again, for those of you that were in the session yesterday, there is an API that you can do specifically for searching for constituents within Razor's Edge NXT. The host for that is going to be api.sky.blackbaud.com. The path is going to be, you see here with that constituents, v1 constituents search. And the query parameters, like what am I actually searching for, is that search text equals Hernandez. Now, in this case here, one of my main parameter is I've got that question mark and I'm specifically saying, hey, I'm searching for Robert Hernandez. Now, in some cases, you may actually have a path parameter. There's no question mark here. There's no, like when you're in Google, you see the question mark, search equals, or what have you. The reason why is that when I'm getting a specific record, if I'm asking specifically for Robert Hernandez's record, there's no question mark or search equals at the end. It's actually part of the address, and we call that a path parameter. Again, some of the stuff that again, this presentation will be made available at toward the end or after the conversation today, especially when this is available for on demand. Don't necessarily, for the purposes of the discussion now, don't necessarily need to have these down pat, but just kind of introduction to some of these concepts here should have come up in the conversation. And in some cases, what we call that path parameter and query parameter may be all together. So in this case here, I'm looking specifically for all the addresses for Robert Hernandez, 280, but I do not want to include inactive ones. So the path parameter, because I'm specifically asking for Robert Hernandez, is built in here. And then the include inactive equals false is my query parameter saying, hey, I'm asking for all the addresses for Robert, but don't show me the inactive ones. Another key thing we'll be talking about that comes up when we're talking about not only APIs, but in custom connectors is the concept of authentication. There are a few options with authentication options with APIs and connectors. None. No authentication. Basic. Oftentimes that's in the form of a username and password. API key. That's part of the query parameter or the header. And something that's called OAuth, which is the most secure, so there's more pieces to it. That's the basis of Blackbaud ID. So again, multiple different ways to secure that. We'll kind of talk through a couple different options in a few moments. Our examples today go through a methodical approach of the introduction to the basics of custom connectors and understanding their components. There's a lot to it. Today is getting you started. If you've already worked with custom connectors, you may see me skipping shortcuts. I'm doing this methodically so we can introduce topics as we go through. That's on purpose. Sometimes the shortcuts don't make sense unless you have a feel for the underlying pieces. So again, we're going to go through piece by piece and kind of build on top of stuff as we go through. We're going to start with a simple example. We're going to talk about a website called catfact.ninja. Yes, that's a real address. We'll get to there in just a second. It's one of the common examples of people working with APIs and things like that for the first time. It is some things that if you've Googled APIs or whatever, chances are this has popped up. In all full transparency, I'm not that type of artist. That came from AI that said, hey, show me a cat dressed up as a ninja. I think it pretty works. But this is going to be a good example of getting started with REST API. So that being said, I'm going to stop screen sharing for a second. I'm still here. I'm going to go back and share my web browser in just a second. And not that I do like cats. I'm also a dog person, but unfortunately, I could not find a direct dog version of this. Okay. So you should see CatFact API on the screen right now. Now this is literally an example area here. So it's going to give you a lot of stuff like giving you to you directly. It's not always going to be this easy, but I want to start off with it here. The nice thing about this is that this is a very small API. Gives a couple different endpoints, such as getting the cat facts or certain breeds. For example, if I want to try this API endpoint of /fact, I can go through and maybe give it I can try it out. Let's say I want a fact that's no longer than 150 characters. I can execute this, and it's going to give me all the behind the scenes information to that. Lawrence, you're sort of kind of similar to Postman. We'll actually talk about that in a few moments. But this is ways that you may see several websites that do give you a lot of information about their APIs. Not all of them do. Will give you an interface similar to this. So the nice thing is that, hey, I've got this CatFact API. It's just a few endpoints. But I want to create a connector for this. How do I create a connector for that? Now, the nice thing is in this scenario here, it's going to be very simple. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my Power Automate. And I'm going to go to my custom connector section. There may be a more that you have to click on that. I've kind of pinned this here. I'm going to go to custom connectors. You may see various different options here. We'll talk about those in a few minutes because I've already done this a few times. But I'm going to create a connector from blank. Yes, I know I can do this as well. Go away. Here we go. I call it Cat Facts Demo. So I'm creating, there are ways to maybe short circuit this process, but I want to start from the beginning so that we're familiar with all the different pieces that are available with working with an API. It's going to ask me, when I create an API from scratch, it's going to ask me a number of things such as I can upload an image if I want to, change the background color for that icon. Not going to do that here. I'm going to need a description. This connector gives you information about cat facts and AN breeds. If you have less than 30 characters, it'll yell at you for some reason. Now, as I mentioned before, there's various different components that are available as part of the API. It's going to ask me what the host is for that API. So I'm going to go back over here to CatFacts, and I'm going to go to one of my examples here, and I can see that it's going to be catfact.ninja. That's the base part of the address that's going to be in all of my API calls. So I'm going to paste that there, and all my API calls simply just have a slash at the end. Some API calls have like a slash v1 at the end. In this case here, we don't need that. We just have a slash. So again, it's asking me to begin with, where is this API located? What is the server with this API? This case is going to be catfact.ninja. This is going to ask me some security. In this case, there's no authentication. Do you need a premium Power Automate to create a custom connector? Yes. I believe so. It's been a hot minute since I tested. Let me go on do not disturb for a second. Here we go. Now I need to go through and define each of the different the different areas. Now the thing is, yeah, like Susan has mentioned, the off rack rate for Power Automate per user is $15 a month. Only the authors need that. The nonprofit rate is around $4 or $5 a month. Don't quote me on that because it can change at any time, but it is not that heavy an investment. And some of you may already have it if you're a Microsoft shop and you just may not know it. So I want to create my actions. I want to create those things that the API is going to do. So I'm going to create my first action. I'm going to give it a summary, which is what I'm going to call it. Get fact, a longer description, and the operation ID. I usually do the name of the summary, but it doesn't like spaces, so I get fact. So what this is doing is basically saying to go through the it's kind of go through and setting the stuff up. So say having to give it some basic information. It's going to ask me, hey, give me an example of a request. Those of you that have worked with parse JSON in Power Automate, you're going to start seeing a lot of familiarity here because they're asking for examples of stuff. So my examples here is I want to do again, for this get fact, it wants to show, it wants an example. So I'm going to go through here and I'm going to copy this example that I just created, for my example here. In fact, I'll go ahead on here to this request URL. Curl is a command line geeky thing. I'll just use this request URL here. I'm going to copy this here. I'm going to paste it into my URL as well. I don't need to put any headers in my request. There's nothing that I need to actually specify as far as that goes. So I'm going to just I'm going to paste an example of the URL, and I'm just going to click on import. So it imported that that request, and it's already broken things out for me. Now, as I go through and look at my different query parameters for a certain, for a certain action, I actually have the ability to go through and give those themselves different descriptions. I can say whether or not something is required or not required, and I can show whether or not I want something to show immediately in the connector. Like if I always want to ask for what the maximum length is, no matter what, I can go in and show that. However, the nice thing is that as far as the key pieces that are needed as part of creating that, I've already got that in place. Now it needs an example of the response. What can I expect to get back from the API? This is going to be very, needed that when you want to get those downstream dynamic pieces of content. So I'm actually going to copy this. Gave me the results. I'm going to copy this. I'm going to go back to my demo here, and I'm going to import from sample. I'm going to paste my body. Again, if you've done the parse JSON within Power Automate already, this is going to be familiar, and I'm going to click on import. And what that did here is it went through and created the specifics it needs to know as far as the area goes. Now I can go through and do that for each of the different the different actions that are available within the API here. I'm just going to go ahead and create this connector with the one action. And wait for the Jeopardy theme song. It's really not coming, but this is the longest time. Sometimes this takes longer than creating the connector in the first place. Okay. I'm going to go back to my custom connectors. Then I'm going to cheat and fast forward in time and look at the one that I've already created. And it shows that the definition here, I've got my get fact, I've got my list facts, I got my list reads. Again, I did this through the same method of basically just copying and pasting from the documentation that I got before. So I get my so I've got that here. So what I can do now is that once I go through and I've actually created that that connector and I've saved it, I can go to my flows. I can create a new flow. I'm going to just create an instant flow. Call it cat fact example demo. Manually trigger it. I'm going to create my flow. And I'm going to go to my custom connectors. I'm going to choose my cat fact one. Let's just do, oh, I don't know, that get fact. I want my maximum length to be 200. And then I'm going to create a compose so I can capture that output. Again, takes a while to save. I think it's because on another screen I've got like 100 browser tabs open. Yeah, one of our very first customer connector courses was actually talking about, if you go back to our Sky Developer YouTube channel, I think there's one from like a number of years ago that talks about just giving. Very involved, very good. And now that I can see here that based on that I was able to get from my custom connector, a simple cat fact that has cats don't have sweat glands over their bodies like humans do. They sweat only through their paws. So again, very basic here. The key thing here is that if you've got the documentation at your fingertips, then in creating at least a basic connector is you're really just going through and taking the documentation that's available, copying the example requests, pasting in, and if it gives you the sample responses as well, you can paste that in. And within if it's a large API, then there's going to take a number of steps. But as far as a basic level, that is one of that is the simple get started way as far as working with getting something from an API documentation into creating a custom connector. Again, this is the very basic version just to get things started. Now, sometimes the question comes up that says, hey, I've got the documentation at least for the types of requests that's in the API, but it doesn't give me examples. It doesn't give an examples of what the output is going to be. How can I get examples of the outputs before I actually create the custom connector? Well, that is where a tool called Postman comes into play. So the Postman is basically Postman is it's a free app that is used for creating APIs, for working with APIs, for doing all sorts of stuff. However, the key thing is here is that, and give me just a second, I'm going to share my screen. Let me move this back over for the sake of time. In just a moment. So what I can do, yeah, the cat facts change randomly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share another screen and show you what Postman looks like. Give me just a moment. I have too many windows open. Oh, this should be that. Okay, let me share here. See if I make this a little bigger. So the nice thing is that I'm trying to make this a little bit bigger. Is that the nice thing about one of the basic things about Postman is that it gives you the ability, it gives you an interface for actually going through and doing what sometimes you can do directly in the documentation website, but I can actually do in another place. So for example, here I've got my cat fact. So I've got my different addresses, my different URLs for the each of the different APIs, the get fact, the get facts, the get breeds. I've been able to actually go through and basically the same process that I did in browser for directly on the catfact.ninja site. I'm actually doing directly here within Postman, so that I could technically go through the same steps that I did in creating that connector, that custom connector in the first place. So I can go through here. I can copy and paste in the different example URLs to call the APIs. Then I can actually go through and get the successful examples from when actually posting that. And then I can copy and paste this and put that directly into the manual part of the API that I like I did before. Now, the nice thing though, for those of you that have used Postman, one of the nice things about this is if I've actually gone through, again, this is a scenario if you can actually get the examples of both the post or the get and the response directly from the API's website, that is great. Just do that. Now, if I go through here and say, hey, all I do is only got examples of the GET requests and I don't have examples of the responses, especially when I'm getting information, then I've gone through here and actually created all these examples on Postman. Now, the nice thing is that I've gone through and created these examples on Postman. I don't have to hand copy and paste this into Power Automate. Because the nice thing about this is that this actually has an option that says export. So when I've gone through and actually created all of the different examples in Postman, then instead of hand copying those back into Power Automate to create my custom connector, I can actually export this from Postman from what is called a collection. Collection 2, collection V2, or collection V2.1, I use V2. The nice thing about this is that this is going to export this as a .json file that I can just take all those API endpoints, all those examples, especially I've got more than just 3 of them, and import all those at once into Power Automate. I'll show you where that happens. Share my screen again. There is an MSN, Susan, I see that. Hopefully you have luck with that, but there is an MSN weather connector already built in. But feel free to use the one that you want to try for the sake of it. But there's always one. If you need it today, there's already an MSN weather. So the nice thing is that when I'm actually here and I'm actually working with custom connectors, if I've exported a file from Postman already, then instead of actually going through here and clicking on custom connector and saying create from blank, then you can actually say import a Postman collection, and I can go catfact. I can go find that file. And when I import that, then it's actually got all of my information already. So my get fact, my get facts, my get breeds, or what have you. So the key thing about that then is that certainly I can go through and hand do the setup. I could go through, and if I can't do the hand do based on the documentation that's already available in the main API, on the API reference, I can actually go through and do it in Postman. If I do that in Postman, then I can actually export that information out of Postman and just import it into Power Automate to create my custom connector without necessarily having to go through the specific piece by piece processes there. Another option that's available, depending on how the documentation is set up for the APIs you're taking a look at, is that another option here is going to be import an API file. The reason why you've got this import an API file is that in some cases, some some services that have an API, sometimes they'll just list what the responses are, or what the maybe list some examples what their API endpoints are. Others, if they're so emboldened, may actually give what is called an API spec. This basically has all the nitty-gritty information behind the scenes about the API. That, under the right circumstances, all I need to do is save this file and import it within Power Automate. And just like I was importing it, the Postman file, I've got a my V1 or my draft version of a custom connector. Only thing is that what we see here is that when I'm looking at this information, this API spec for CatFacts, I see that the open API is 3.0.0. Unfortunately, and that's an overused word, Power Automate only accepts what's called, in the previous version it was called Swagger, but if it says 3.0.0, Power Automate is not going to make it, is not going to accept it directly. It's got to say 2.0 or 2 dot something. That's the type of API files that that Power Automate accepts. If it says 3.0, which is really the most common nowadays, it's going to yell at you. Now, some creative workarounds may be, hey, I'm going to take this API, I can actually import that into Postman, and then turn around and export it from Postman and import that into Power Automate. However, you may actually lose some stuff in translation. So if somebody says, hey, we have got your API spec specifically for you, here it is. If it says 3.0, I can actually import the spec. I can't, if it says 3.0, I can't pull that directly within Power Automate. If it says 2 dot something, then I can. And it sounds like we've got some examples of people that's already been able to get some cat facts in a custom connector. That's great that some of you have been able to tackle that. Again, this is the simplest example, but if you start catching on with this, you can start catching on with some more of the complicated scenarios. So let me go through and share my screen again. Let's go back to presentation mode. The example that I showed you was a very basic example. It does not require any, notice I did not do any kind of authentication. If you need to have, one of the most common ways of doing authentication is API keys. Different websites will tell you basically, in many cases, you have to register for an API key is very similar to if you registered for your Blackbaud developer account. You got a key for that. Integrating with Blackbaud, the reason why we're starting very basic today, so we're not diving into some of the other options available. But one of the other options available, as far as if you need to authenticate, then is what we call API keys. It's going to give you a cryptic string that one way or the other that you need to pass into your requests. This is going to either be through a query parameter or it's a header. Now, again, it's a couple different ways that they'll approach that. Here's an example when I'm actually going through and editing the security area under my API for my custom connector. Then on the security page, I'll actually go through and say, okay, I need to select an API key as well as what that that parameter name is going to be. So again, because of the fact that even when you have something as fundamental as API keys, whatever website, whatever service that you're going to that they require an API key, it will give you instructions as far as what that API key should be. Do you need to put it on the header, or do you need a part of a query? Here's an example of putting it in the header when you're creating your connector. Now again, basic, no authorization, of course, is the easiest to create. Some government agencies have no authorization required, especially if the information they're giving is public domain. Some of them still require API authorizations and you getting an API key specifically for the purposes of metering, any kind of connections. There's also a concept that is called OAuth. This is where the brain starts hurting, at least for me, for the first time. So OAuth stands for Open Authorization, and it's a multi-step process for granting authorization to resources. Basically, what it does is it splits the authorization and data request into multiple pieces. The current version is OAuth 2.0, though it's referred to as simply OAuth for short. What in the world am I talking about? So this is the most complicated authentication, in my humble opinion, not a technical term, but it basically splits out the responsibility of authorization plus access in two different areas. So you've got a requester, like some external service, such as maybe Power Automate. That is actually, before I can even touch the data behind the scenes in that connector, you've got to actually ask a different service, am I allowed? If that authorization service says, yes, you are, it'll send a key. And then I've got to turn around and send that key back to the real data service to actually get the results I'm looking for. Again, it's a multi-step process, more secure than API keys, more secure than no authorization, but definitely needs a number of different steps. The prevalence of OAuth is used by a variety of services. Google, Facebook, Microsoft, Apple, Blackbaud, many other companies. This is becoming more and more of one of the prevalent ways in order to do authentication, not only to services but also APIs in general. I have seen there are places out there that are doing just something just as simple as an API key, but a lot of organizations, especially when you start getting to those larger companies, using what was called OAuth here. So there's definitely a number of different pieces to that puzzle. Now, what I am going to do, so I've stopped sharing that for now. What that gives you, that's what that is giving us so far, is just a very high level overview of what are custom connectors, what are the basics of custom connectors, how to create my first itty bitty, very simple custom connector. Again, it gets more complicated from that, but the purposes of this discussion today was to kind of introduce some of those concepts and stuff for you so that as you start diving into things, you'd have the ability to get a little bit more information about what does what mean. However, what I'm going to do, and give me just a second. Let me verify that I've got it published now. Give me just a moment. Oh, that didn't quite work. Give me just a moment. So what I'm posting in the chat right now is a link to my presentations from both yesterday and today. Again, we'll be working to upload this to the session after the fact for those that are coming back and taking a look at the presentation on demand. What for some reason is not, for some reason, what's not showing up, and I'll try to get that working right after our presentation today, is I actually put together an example of how do I work with doing a custom connector with the Blackbaud product using an OAuth. It definitely takes a number of different steps. So we want to have time to, after going through the basics, we'll not have the chance to do that today. But what I will have in the same location is an example using memberships, because there's not a connector yet now for memberships, of a step-by-step process of how to create a custom connector using memberships as the example for a Blackbaud product. So it should be showing up right now for some whatever random reason, but it's not showing up because live TV is awesome. But once I figure out why that is not showing up, I will get that uploaded to that same address. So let me come off being mysterious for a moment. See if there's any Q&A that I might have missed.
Yeah, Glenn, I did publish two or push two questions to the Q&A, one from Amber and one from Nicholas, if you're able to see those.
See a number. Yes. So so there's a couple things. For those of you that are working with other Blackbaud products, this is Blackbaud grant making without published connectors. We have to make custom connectors. There is a special connector that's already available. That's called the Sky Add-ins connector. That's already published. That has an action that is called send an HTTP request that allows you to connect to pretty much any API, Blackbaud API endpoint, Blackbaud Sky API endpoint, except for payments, without having to go through the custom connector process. So that's one of the reasons why I focus specifically on third-party custom connectors today, because technically speaking, for Blackbaud solutions, you don't need to create a custom connector. That send an HTTP request that's already available as part of the Sky add-in connector is already available, so you don't have to go through even all of these steps in order to be able to access the grant making options. And in fact, I think there may be a grant making maybe today or tomorrow. There's actually a Blackbaud grant making Sky add-ins session that is showing some examples of that, and I created one of those examples using that send an HTTP request. I think there were similar questions about that. Are custom connectors needed for any RE data? No, if it's not available yet in the connector, then you can use that send an HTTP request in order to access that. And let me see if I can send a quick link to what I am talking about here. Just a moment. I don't have the link handy, but we do talk about it within the community quite a bit. I want to make sure there's any other questions that I may have missed. I think you mentioned somebody else, Scott, but I forgot now who.
Yeah, we had a question from Amber. For some of the processes we are looking to automate, I have run into the issue of the token timing out mid-flow. Are there plans to expand on the token timeout length, or would we need to build flows that are running the same action simultaneously?
I'm not sure of the context there, Amber. Are you talking about? Yeah, yeah, that may be one of those things that we do have the Ask a Low Code developer session tomorrow for that. May need a little more context as far as what you're trying to do. So I wouldn't be able to answer that right now. I'll be part of that low code developer thing tomorrow, so I'll try to noodle on this if I have a chance before tomorrow. But I won't be able to answer that in this discussion. Yes, membership endpoints are available for API. Now, again, there's not a connector for that. Let me, I can put in the link to that because I had that ready as a just in case. So again, there's no specific connector right now for memberships, but there is the APIs are available. And again, we can't create a connector until the APIs are stable, and there's a few of those that are still in preview. So I'll just put in the chat a link to the APIs, the API information as far as memberships go. I see one of the other questions in chat is, do we need OAuth or is that best practice? That is up to the publisher of the API. So if they say we're using OAuth, you have to use OAuth. If they're saying we're using an API key, you have to use API key. It's up to the publisher to determine how the authentication happens. If an RE connector, let me look for. I know we're getting to the top of the time because I keep seeing this question. Oh, I know how to show it. Let me share one last thing. Just want to point people in the right direction. Share this in just a second. All right, I'm going to create a quick flow. I'm going to add an action under Blackbaud Sky add-ins. It's called send an HTTP request. I just want to show you guys this. What this does, this send an HTTP request, if there is something in Blackbaud Sky API that is not currently available for you, you do not necessarily always have to go through that custom connector process. That's why, again, that's why I was focusing to this, the discussion today on third-party APIs. This send an HTTP request action, which is under the Sky add-ins connector, will allow you, without having to go through the custom connector process, to access anything that's in Sky API other than payments. And it follows all the same throttling and things like that as far as the regular API does. So I'll stop there because I know we got sessions coming up, and I know there's a survey coming up. But I just wanted to make sure that, again, what we're talking about today is not required to connect to anything that's not already in the connector for Razor's Edge or Financial Edge or Blackbaud CRM or Alltrue or grant making. This is gearing it toward third parties. Is that those you don't necessarily have that.
Absolutely. And Glenn did reference the survey. I did launch that. So if you haven't taken a couple minutes to just answer those questions in there, folks, certainly would appreciate that. Always looking for good feedback, and be sure to give Glenn 5 stars. I've seen some good comments already left in the chat, so certainly appreciate all his work.
Yes, as long as, to answer one of the questions, as long as the information, as long as the API endpoints are available in the other system, yes, you can push back information back and forth from Razor's Edge.
Perfect. And as we mentioned earlier, I believe in the BB Dev Days portal, I guess, so to speak, the on-demand sessions, all the recordings for sessions throughout the week will be posted, available by the end of day Friday. So if there is any that you missed, just log back into that Swoogo website. All right, awesome. Well, certainly appreciate everyone joining the session today. Thank you again, Glenn, for all the valuable knowledge you've shared with us today, and certainly hope everyone found it beneficial. Hope you enjoy the rest of the sessions that we are offering this week through BB Days. And thank you again so much for joining us. Appreciate your partnership. But have a great rest of the day, folks, and certainly do let us know if there's any feedback on that survey. Certainly appreciate it. But thanks again, folks.
Thanks, everyone.